Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today here on Everyday Lutheran. In today's Bible study, we are going to continue our study of the book of Romans, beginning with the very first chapter. In the beginning, we need to start with the introduction that Paul has. Paul introduces himself in such a way that he introduces not only himself, but also the gospel. Paul takes 16 verses for his full introduction, but it's not a typical introduction as we would think about it. Everything that he has revolves around God and Paul's calling. Paul spends time explaining who he is because Paul has never met the people in Rome. They've heard of his missions and congregations that he has started, yet none of them have met him. Along with this intro, Paul, in typical fashion, gives a prayer of thanksgiving for the people who he is writing to. The introduction concludes with the focus on the gospel. In verse 16, the word ashamed is one that often sticks out to people. Now, within the culture that values honor and pride, this actually notes the weakness that the gospel seems to convey to people, and yet it is in this weakness that we find the truth of God. Even today, people will use this line of Paul but mean it as a prideful boast, as they are not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus. Yet they're doing so contrary to how Paul is meaning it to be. See the previous verses. Paul is zealous that he is weak and nothing, but God is everything. The other topic that we talk about in these verses is salvation. Making a person whole, restoring them to safety and security. Now, this is often noted, especially in the church, as removing of sins, righteousness. This is an idea of being aligned with God's law. This also is noted as a person who is moral or legal justice. So this is often when people get the idea that to be a good person is to be within God's law. Yet here is always where that idea fails, because then you are striving only in the eyes of others to be good, rather than in the eyes of God to be good and right. The very next topic that Paul brings up is God's wrath. How did people incur God's wrath? This concept of God's wrath is often referred from the ideas of the Old Testament. God's anger against individuals, nations, and even for generations. For many, it was clear that when God's wrath came against you, then it was because of your actions or the actions of others around you. Yet it was also this clarity that people began to become their own judges, their own determination of who was receiving God's wrath. Much of this came back to making a god of their own image or their own creation. So when Paul begins to speak about it now, there is a similar concept or idea, but one that seems to miss the judgment, anger, and separation that we are imparting by wanting to be that judge. Well, that's God's role. Even as the ones whom people had pointed the finger of shame to, declaring how wrong they were, the people simply went further away rather than change their ways. This maybe brings us back to how it is are we treating others. Now, God's wrath was truly against Gentiles, but also the Jews. No one was worth God's salvation on their own merits. God allowed them, despite the decrees of God, to do otherwise. Well, this leads us to the other question that can be raised. Why did God allow the people to remain in sin? Paul notes that God removes the blessings that God has given to the people. The people are left to inflict pain upon themselves. They are separated from God and God's blessings. It is here though in the absence of God, in the absence of joy, that we truly endure suffering. Yet we as humans strive for more. For we feel that by having more, doing more, then we shall fill that void that is there. However, nothing can fill that void that God leaves. This is indeed a lesson that we all wrestle with every single day. It doesn't matter the nation, it doesn't matter the age, it doesn't matter the people. In chapter 2, Paul declares that even the Jewish people, the chosen people of God, have been led astray. Even the people in Rome who he is writing need to recognize that they need to understand, but more importantly, do the laws of God. It's not enough to know the laws and point the finger at others and show them how they are not doing things. Rather, to be a good example to others. This is the example that God delivers in his own Son. For the law of God has not saved the Jewish people. That is the reason that God sent his own Son to enter into the world, to teach, to preach, and more importantly, do the work that we cannot do. Yet still they would declare that it was because of their birth that they would be saved. They knew what to do. So it is not what is in your head that matters. Your knowledge can guide you and help you to know what and how to do things. Yet truly, what it comes down to is the motivation in your heart and how someone is living the whole of their life. Well, this means that you are not reacting to life, but that you are planning, discerning with God, and going with God's guidance in the world. How you are to live, what it is you should do, and what you should do for others. For many of the Jewish people, they would uphold the circumcision as the mark that they were saved and part of the chosen people of God. Now, much like today, someone will wear a cross necklace or other outward signs to show others. While they can prove helpful, they are not meant to be seen by others, but for you to know and to keep yourself focused when you begin wandering away from God. So outward signs become reminders, callings for each and every one of us to hear and know that we might be able to return back to the flock, that we might hear the Good Shepherd calling our names. But never should we declare that this is because of our own work. In chapter 3, Paul gives the understanding that we are all human creatures and are created by God. So if we think that the circumcision or law separates us to make us worthy, then we shall soon realize how we are not worthy. But we are simply doing what others are doing around us. No one is above the other. No nation, no people, no person is better than another. God determines a person. The purpose of the law is to know that we sin, that we need God. All are standing before God's presence. So what is Paul really getting at in all of these chapters? This individual and communal aspects of following God are things that we should truly pay attention to. For this can only be done when we are gathered together to hear someone who will speak truth and love to us. Yet this also means that we need to know it and be willing to listen to it. For many of us, as soon as we think we know it, we feel on top of the world and that all should listen to us. Yet it is in that moment that we have lost it. For we are elevating ourselves above the others. The community, then, should be focused on both the Jews and the Gentiles coming together, not two separate communities, not a divided people. For no nation is above another. for we are all God's people. As a church, we should constantly be focused upon individual and communal aspects of how it is we are living our faith and what it is we're offering the people. Thank you so much again for joining me today on Everyday Lutheran as we are continuing our study through the book of Romans. Join us next time as we continue our study focusing on chapters 3 and 4, the righteousness of God.